For thousands of years, immersing in a mikveh was essential to the laws of family purity. This mitzvah is one of the fundamental doctrines of Jewish faith and family purity. For thousands of years, Jewish couples who have committed themselves to this ancient law have felt that their marriage was strengthened and enhanced through this holy observance. The mitzvah of mikveh is the core of the Jewish family. It's what maintains the foundation of the Jewish people. In those waters, a woman is able to experience a renewal, a very unique moment of special closeness to God, where she could pray for herself, for her husband and family, and for all of Am Yisrael. When a woman immerses in the mikveh, she's connecting herself to the source of life, to the world of purity and kedusha. She's connecting herself to God in a spiritual way that transcends her physicality. And this precious mitzvah of upholding the purity of the Jewish family is entrusted to the woman. Every woman should feel singular and distinct. This is your mitzvah, and God chose you to be the one to bear the torch of kedusha that you pass on through those waters and to the generations that follow. Because so many women, unfortunately, do not understand the importance of this mitzvah, because they don't have the proper knowledge that would enable them to maintain and uphold it, many Jewish women neglect it. For this reason, we have decided to put together this series in the merit of the young couple, Miriam and Ari, who are getting married. We hope and pray that women who take the time to learn about this precious mitzvah and they take it upon themselves to visit the waters of the mikveh will not only merit to enhance their life and their marriage, but let it stand as a zechut for this young couple, that they should experience happiness, togetherness, and that they should be protected. Let it be a zechut for this young couple that they live with shalom bayit and merit to see generations upon generations of children whom they brought into the world through this beautiful mitzvah, and that they witness miracles, blessings, and yeshuot in their life.
We hope this series will also stand as a merit to all of the singles in Am Yisrael who are searching for their zivug. May they be zeicha to fulfill the mitzvah of mikveh speedily.
In part 3 of the mikveh series, we are going to talk about elevation to a higher level, which necessitates the mikveh. The power of the mikveh to generate growth and renewal isn't only isolated to the idea of elevation from tumah to tahara, but also the immersion in a mikveh brings one to a state of kedusha, specifically kedushat Yisrael. I'll explain what that means. You see, when Bnei Yisrael were in the process of becoming a real nation, they required immersion in a mikveh prior to the receiving of the Torah, prior to Matan Torah. Our rabbis tell us that there were 3 things that Bnei Yisrael had to do in order to enter into a covenant with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Number 1, the men had to perform a brit milah, a circumcision. Number 2, immersion in a mikveh. And number 3, they had to offer up a korban, a sacrifice. And that's the law until this very day. A convert, for example, who wishes to join Am Yisrael must immerse in a mikveh in order to bask under the wings of the Shekhinah. Even utensils that are manufactured by Gentiles have to be immersed in a mikveh if a Jew wishes to use them. So all this is the transition from chol, from the mundane, to a higher place, to kodesh. In addition, we find that the elevation and renewal process and going from one stage to an elevated one necessitates the mikveh. And we see this idea in a pasuk in Sefer Shemot concerning the inauguration of Aharon Cohen and his sons as Kohanim, as high priests. What does the pasuk say? ואת אהרון ואת בניו תקריב אל פתח אוהל מועד ורחצת אותם במים. And Aharon and his sons bring close to the opening of the tabernacle, and you shall bathe them in water. Rashi HaKadosh, alav hashalom, comments on the word verachatzta, and you shall bathe them, and he writes, Zu tfilat kol haguf. This is the immersing of the entire body. So what do we learn from this command? As a result of the immersion in water, Moshe Rabbeinu was able to elevate Aharon and his sons to a holy status of Kohanim. So in this case here, we're not referring to a situation where Aharon had to purify himself from Tumah. Rather, Aharon's personal status changed and he was elevated from one level of Kedusha to a higher level. And this change of status and elevation was as though Aharon and his sons were now new creations. That's the reason that their priesthood required immersion in a mikvah. And the same is true, by the way, when a Cohen performs his service in the Bet HaMikdash. He must immerse himself in a mikvah because he's transitioning from the mundane daily routines of life to the avodat kodesh, to service that's holy. So let's talk about the grandeur of immersion in relation to growth and nature. We learned that the immersion in a mikvah has the power to bring a person to a state of refinement and or purification and growth. We spoke about in the previous class. And we also learned that the person who immerses in a mikvah comes to a state of self-purification. His status is transformed and he's on a greater level than the seed that we plant into the ground. Because the seed doesn't require any preparation process in order to begin growing. But a person is different in this regard. A person must prepare himself physically before he enters the mikveh waters and before he experiences the process of renewal. In many instances in the Torah HaKadosha, we find that in order to get from one level of spirituality to a higher level, we require a preparation of at least 7 days. For example, before Matan Torah, Bnei Israel were asked to prepare themselves for 7 weeks consisting of 7 days each. Shiv'a Shavuot shel Shiv'at Yamim. Those are the number of weeks from Pesach until Shavuot, which took us from the 49th level of Tumah so that we could enter into the gates of Kedusha, which was the highest level. Not only that, but prior to Aharon and his sons beginning their initial service in the Mishkan, they were asked to prepare themselves for 7 days in the courtyard of the Mishkan. They had to do this in order to be worthy of bringing a korban before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not only that, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, must separate himself from his home and his wife 7 days prior to Yom Kippurim as a preparation for his service in the Kodesh HaKodashim, in the Holy of Holies. And we find that the same is true for a Nida. The Torah in Sefer Vayikra states, V'safra la shivat yamim ve'achar tithar. She must count 7 clean days before she can immerse in a mikvah. So we see from all the cases that we mentioned that the transition from Tumah to Tahara necessitates a preparation of 7 days. What the preparations are and their significance That's for another class. But what we realize is that the purpose of a woman immersing in the mikvah is to remove the tumah status from upon her and to transform her into a renewed, pure, and holy creation. And all this is done to prepare herself to become a partner with Borei Olam, a partner that brings down to this world a new life, a partner that brings down a holy soul that came from underneath the throne of glory, from the Kiseh HaKavod. So at this point, ladies, I would like to move on to the idea of how family purity protects the holiness of Yisrael. You see, ladies, generations upon generations of Jewish women guarded the laws of Tahara, even though they didn't have the vast knowledge or rabbinical sources that we have today that teach us the functionality and wonder of the mikveh. And many of these women, even those who relinquished Yahadut or faltered from the Torah, they did not waver when it came to the laws of mikveh. They were steadfast in their belief that the laws of Taharat HaMishpacha, family purity, guaranteed the purification of generations. And they also believed that the laws of family purity is the foundation of a Jewish home, and it creates a continuity of generations that will remain faithful and hopefully holy. Here are just two examples in Jewish history that depict for us the importance of a mikvah and the laws of Taharat HaMishpacha. In Sefer Melachim Aleph, we read about Melech Achav. Now, he was one of the very few men who go down in history as a king who does not have a chelek in Olam Haba. He does not have a share in the world to come. He sinned greatly, and he caused the masses to sin as well, which is a terrible crime. He married a Gentile woman named Izevel Bat Et Baal. He forced the Jewish people to worship idols. He killed the prophets of his generation, and he caused Eliyahu HaNavi Zachur Latov a great deal of distress. So we're talking about a very sinful man. So just to give you an idea of how terrible the situation was in his generation, there were only 7,000 Jews who refused to bow down to the Avodah Zarah. Can you imagine such a thing? Everybody else sinned because of him. Now, in recent years, in archaeological digs in Eretz Yisrael, they discovered his palace in Shomron. What did they find in the palace of Achav, who has no chelek in Olam Haba? A kosher mikveh. This was one aspect of Yahadut he did not relinquish. In his generation, they worshipped Avodah Zarah in great numbers, but the Jews refused to sin concerning this one mitzvah of family purity. Could you imagine? That's one example. Another example I want to give you is that during the era of Rashi HaKadosh, women had to make a tremendous effort to immerse in a wellspring that they used as a mikveh. Rashi lived in Worms, which was a small city on the outskirts of Germany, right next door to France. There, you can still find the ancient mikveh near one of the rivers. Near that river, many women immersed in a very deep wellspring. But ladies, in order to get to that wellspring, you had to descend 40 steps without any isolation from the freezing winter cold, without handrails during the 1100s. After going down those 40 steps, the women would reach a small area. In that area, there was a shelf carved from stone where they could then place a small candle in order to illuminate that small space. Then there was another small stone that protruded from the wall for them to be able to hang their clothes. And then they descended another 20 cold steps made from stone without clothing, and they immersed themselves in the freezing waters of the wellspring. For what purpose? in order to purify and renew themselves. That's the second example that I want to give you of how important it was for the women of past to preserve this mitzvah of taharat hamishpacha. And now I want to move on to the actual menstrual cycle, and I'll give you the short version. Ladies, during the period of a woman's menstrual cycle, she is declared tameh, impure. And as a result of this status, she is not permitted to be with her husband. We spoke about this, I think, in the first class. But the Pasuk in Sefer Vayikra says the following regarding her status. Ve'el isha benidat tumata lo tekrav legalot ervata. And to a woman during her uncleanness of her separation, you shall not come near her to uncover her nakedness. The Torah is telling us that a woman who experiences menstrual discharge remains in her state of menstrual separation for 7 days because her status is tameh. So let's briefly attempt to understand why it is that this particular kind of blood renders a woman impure, whereas the natural flow of blood that streams forth from other places in the body due to an injury, for example, does not cause her to become impure. How come when I bleed from my nose, God forbid, I don't become impure? If I cut myself and I bleed, I don't become impure. So let's understand this concept of dam nidah. According to Torah law, when a person dies, chas v'shalom, his body becomes impure in a manner that's extremely severe. We call this state tumat met, the impure state of the dead. Why is this so? I'll explain it to you. You see, within man, there exists an ethereal soul that provides the entire body with energy, with life and vitality. Therefore, the moment the neshama leaves his body, the person ceases to exist. He dies. Upon the departure of the spiritual sustenance that provides a living being with life, the body itself begins to decay and becomes obsolete. That's why the body decomposes, because the neshama is not inside the body. The process exists in the spiritual realm as well, with regards to the impure and pure state. In other words, the moment the life-sustaining mechanism vanishes, a spiritual decay begins to take place that we call tumah. So based on this teaching, we can try to understand the intricate and hidden laws of the nidah. As is well known in the medical world, the blood that emanates from the woman's body during her menstrual cycle is a result of the breaking down of the lining of the uterus in the womb. The task of the lining of the uterus is to receive within it the intended fetus. In other words, the function of the uterus is to draw down a new life into this world. But at the moment that the lining of the uterus begins to disintegrate and doesn't allow a life to be drawn down, that's considered a form of death. So we can now understand why any other blood flow would not achieve a status of impurity or purity for that matter, because it's only the blood that emanates as a result of a loss of life, so to speak, that brings about a state of impurity. And as a result of this, the woman is rendered tameh during her menstrual cycle. When in every monthly cycle the potential for life doesn't actuate, and instead the lining of the uterus decomposes and dies, a state of impurity befalls the woman as she, so to speak, comes in contact with death. Now, many women feel that the status of tumah is not a very favorable terminology. They feel insulted by it. But I want to teach you a very deep sod, ladies, because Chachamim actually define the word Tumah as a cancellation of elevation. And there's a big difference then between the word impurity and cancellation of elevation. Tumah comes from the word atimut, which means something that is sealed. That means that when a woman is menstruating, what's happening is that she's experiencing a temporary blockage of life and of birth. And therefore she's rendered teme'ah, impure. Why? The reason is due to the temporary loss of her unique ability to create the very life which she's unable to produce during her cycle. Therefore, during this time period, every month, the woman's level of spirituality diminishes. Until when? Until her inner components are rejuvenated and she's returned to her elevated state. What state is that? The state of being the founder of life. And that puts everything, ladies, into an amazing perspective for you. So let's talk about the unprotected womb. Now, as is well known, the air that surrounds a person, it's filled with bacteria, with viruses. The bacteria can very easily penetrate a person's body through various orifices, such as the mouth, the nose, the ears, and even the vaginal area. And that can endanger a person's life. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in His infinite wisdom, created defense mechanisms that are able to combat and defeat these germs. There are special acids situated in the vaginal canal that protect the woman from external harm. During the menstrual cycle, these acids, they are released outside the body together with the blood flow. And as a result of that, the woman is left unprotected. Now, Dr. Smithline, who is a specialist in his field, he discovered through extensive research that a man and a woman who engage in marital relations while a woman's lining of the uterus is regenerating and the uterus is unprotected, he discovered that it could bring about various infections and all sorts of complications that could, chas v'shalom, eventually cause uterine cancer. Many doctors are discovering that uterine cancer is 15 times more prevalent in Gentile women, unfortunately, than Jewish women who are observing the laws of family purity, and that's such an important point to remember. As a matter of fact, Professor Bulkley, one of the leading gynecologists in New York, writes, I'll quote you his words, "There is a consensus among doctors that women who abide by the family purity laws of the Torah are less susceptible to uterine cancer." You hear this, ladies? So we see from here just a snippet of God's wisdom and how things that may not make sense to the limited mind, they have a purpose and they have a function in the world. We're learning how separation during this pivotal time in a woman's monthly cycle is beneficial in many ways. First of all, it prevents illnesses. It rejuvenates her relationship with her husband. It helps to maintain mastery over your urges and desires. And the most important thing, it helps to solidify a woman's focal role in the home as a wife and not an object.